Welcome to the God is Not an Asshole podcast. If you are one of the many people done with religious dogmatism, hang on. You might sense transcendence, but your church or other faith community never seem to get off the ground. You realize that honoring your conscience means more than fitting in and keeping hard-to-explain rules? Hang on. You could probably think of the goodness in your tradition, and you tried your best to save that baby, but there's so much bathwater. Join your hosts, David Norman Moore Jr. in California and Carrie Connolly in New Jersey, who are collaborating to bring on guests who have found life on the other side of fundamentalism. Guests with stories of how they have liberated themselves from beliefs that divide us from each other. None of our guests' narratives are identical, but we hope you'll find something in common with each of them. We invite you to experience our common bond as we all inspire even more of us to embrace the true self.
It's good to see you, Barb Parmet. Carrie and I hosted you before October 7th, and so much has changed since then that I thought I would try to get you back, and I appreciate you coming on. For all of our listeners, Barb Parmet represents Jewish Voice for Peace here in the Santa Barbara area. She and I have renewed contact because we're both now on the executive board of the Santa Barbara affiliate of the NAACP. And so it reflects something that Barbara said to herself after 2016. She swore that she would not live a segregated life. And so she's been slowly developing relationships in those communities made to feel marginalized and unseen. And so she's following her sisters and brothers in fighting for racial and economic justice. She uses her white privilege to promote opportunities for young artists of color so they can lead us out of the land of white supremacy and hate. And we had such a great talk a few months ago. But as I just mentioned, so much has changed with October 7th. And I think well, first of all, how you doing, Barb?
Well, fortunately, I'm doing really, really well. I would just say I came last night home from a conference of 300 Jewish Voice for Peace, anti-racist, anti-Zionist. And we of organizers, 300 organizers from Jewish Voice for Peace chapters all over the country, reflecting so many youth and people who have joined Jewish Voice for Peace since October 7th and before. A lot of elders were there. It was so beautiful, and we've been organizing with more Jewish people of color and Sephardic and Mizrachi Jews from North Africa, and it is reflected in the way we organize, in our way of being together. And it was very joyful and very horrifying, and all of the emotions. And it was amazing and as I did with you, in that grieving circle we were participated in. This was
almost about a week and a half ago.
Yeah. And that was an amazing.
Let me just tell everybody that some local women who are Latina, Indigenous, including a woman from the Andes and Palestinian, have built an altar, and it is to bring offerings and remembrances for the children who have been slain in genocide. And so we had about, and it was all word of mouth and very sudden, but there were about 40 of us there in that room to dedicate this altar, which is being made available for people in the community every weekday. And I think there's talk about opening it up on weekends as well. But anyway, both Barb and I and my wife Diane, we were there with everyone. And that's what Barb is describing. Go ahead and say more about that.
Well, I didn't know my role in that situation as in Jewish Voice for Peace. I don't consider myself a religious leader in any way, but I wanted to represent Jewish Voice for Peace because we are grieving. We are grieving so profoundly, and we can't grieve enough, and we can't integrate what's going on in Gaza. And it's, I mean, to be in present hour genocide and watching is incredibly painful for all of us. And that was a short space where we could grieve together. And creating the altar creates this space of ongoing grieving, because we all need to keep grieving continuously as a community.
Yeah. I don't, maybe you can help me understand this. Where's the news coverage? Where's the news coverage of, events that you represent, but especially of the genocide? I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Well, I think we understand at Jewish Voice for Peace because we've been working with the global Palestinian grassroots communities for years, many, many years. And they have asked, and we are the largest anti-Zionist Jewish organization in the world now. And we work with that Palestinian global grassroots community. And they established the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement in 2005. And so,
okay, you mentioned BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction. Now, in some Jewish circles, that's like using swear words.
And that's exactly right. But what's interesting about that is, and it has to do with your question about media and media coverage, because it is a nonviolent resistance movement that is just like South Africa and just like our grape boycotts, that the world globally and the United States, we supported wholeheartedly because we understood what it meant when you have demagogues ruling the people and you have massacres and genocide. So when this was applied by the greater Palestinian community globally, these are like 170 organizations. It's not just a person or a group. So when you have that level of acknowledgement, what happened in 2005 is immediately Israel and all the supporters of Israel said, no, BDS is too dangerous. It's a really dangerous thing. And so they created a narrative that said, you are denying the existence of Israel. They said that. They didn't know what we meant. They didn't know what we were saying. They didn't ask questions. They merely said, this is terrorism. They created a narrative that said, this is dangerous. This is anti-Semitic. So they created ad hominem, all kinds of criticism and name calling to the Palestinians and anyone who aligned with them. And so since we as Jewish resistance joined them, we were included as anti-Semites, as terrorists, as
self-hating.
And so everything that's happened since 2005 and the media and all of the mainstream Jewish organizations that support Israel, they've created this. I mean, we know this from the powers that be at all kinds of levels. So, and the interesting thing about this conference, which was so helpful to us, because we're overwhelmed, just like you said, how can I wrap my head around this? But what happened is these are people globally who've been looking at this for a long time, and they have been able to break it down into pieces so we can begin to understand how it happened. So they spoke about three pillars. And one is political, one is financial, and one is cultural. And when you look at those three pillars, there are cracks in all those pillars.
I'm wondering if what is happening in terms of the dearth of news reports and among legacy media is in any way analogous to in 2016 when I was at Standing Rock. I couldn't find all of the major networks. The Guardian was on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And that was everything else was just really small, independent media.
Mm-hmm.
And here, there were thousands of indigenous people from around the world,
Right.
and they had been dealing with assault from, rubber bullets, which, can be lethal. One woman lost an arm. So I'm wondering if there's something about standing up to the military industrial complex that gets the silent treatment. The media just seems to go dark on things that they're not comfortable with, that somebody's not comfortable with.
And if you think about all the journalists who've been murdered, Palestinian journalists, I don't know the numbers, but it's like 50 or 60 journalists who've been working with press vest on, who've been murdered or bombed.
Yeah, but Israel is calling them terrorists in disguise.
Well, that's what they do. This is a continuity of their narrative. And I think part of our job, as all of us in the solidarity movement, all of us, we understand what's happening. And those of us who are in Jewish Voice for Peace in particular, because we've been accused, because we understand the narrative and we understand why they've created that, we are now beginning to understand how our job as in Jewish resistance with and supporting the Palestinian people means we have to talk to our fellow Jewish folks, our fellow Jewish community, our fellow family.
Moments ago, you had mentioned the various schools, various kinds of Jewish communities who came together, and you mentioned Maghrebi Jews. Now, as North African, as now, correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't they pretty heavily represented in Palestine before 1948, more than say Sephardic or whoever? These North African Jews were probably the most highly represented of Jews there, but that's not the case. Why is that? That's not the case now.
Well, what I'm hearing now, and I didn't know this before, we're all being educated as we speak, is that a lot of these Mizrachi and the Sephardic Jews are from Spain and that kind of tradition, and they were also there. But they have been told they don't exist. Palestinian Jews have also been denied their own identity completely.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, why, like you mentioned, you're grieving, we're grieving, and I'm trying to figure out why this isn't a 5-alarm fire. Air raid. Why isn't where's all the noise about this? That we're getting breaking news on everything but this, and it's very grievous to have to to face the deaths of thousands and thousands of Palestinians, and the silence not only from the media but from esteemed. Okay, so I'm just curious about this. Esteemed spiritual leaders in the world, people that probably you and I both would look up to and want some guidance from, and it seems like they've gone radio dark, and And
There's
you
a
know, and
reason for this. There is
okay,
a
tell me
reason.
about. Yeah, I'm curious about it.
And this is kind of the crux of it, that we understand. And that's why we have those pillars, and we're trying to pull apart the threads so we can understand it, so that we can understand, so we can talk about it and share that knowledge. And what we understand is anti-Semitism, which is hatred of Jews simply because they are Jews.
Mm.
We've all known that. We grew up with that. Many of us have experienced that throughout our lives in one
Sadly,
shape or another.
sadly.
But what happened is the narrative which terrified Israel, at that point, they took the definition of anti-Semitism and changed it.
Mm.
They changed it because there was a definition in Europe they had created that was sent, and you can understand it after the Holocaust in Germany, in World War II, that they would say, if you were criticizing Israel, it was thought at one point, well, you're criticizing the existence of the Jews. If you want to destroy Israel, you want to destroy the Jews. And so that linkage was made. But the person who actually wrote that definition, I don't have his name in front of me, but he said, that's not a definition we need to use on college campuses
Right.
and in general.
Yeah.
But that is the definition that was taken up by the pro-Israeli global hegemony in
Well, yeah,
Israel.
I'm thinking, these major spiritual leaders. I'm wondering why delay? Why wait? But maybe you know something about what creates this atmosphere.
It is fear. It is pure terror and fear. And what this definition, it seems technical, but it's really calling everybody who's against Israel an anti-Semite. So if you're just like if I criticize Trump and all of a sudden I am called a terrorist and you put me in prison, that is what they've done with this definition. And when you call everyone who's we're talking how many hundreds of thousands of people are criticizing the government of Israel. They are all called anti-Semites. It's implied. And when you're called an anti-Semite, there is no defense. And they've created that situation so that everybody's terrified of being called an anti-Semite. And so then they're canceled. And
Do
then
you think this is what's happening at news orgs like MSNBC?
Yes, absolutely. It's happening at every level on all the college campuses. That's how they got rid of Harvard and Pennsylvania, the presidents of their schools, because we have right-wing people accusing them of hating the Jews.
You know, I watched one of Al Sharpton's shows, and I was, kind of fast forwarding, looking at the Chiron to see if he'd ever talk about, Gaza, and never got anything until this past Sunday, I think it was. And I was scrolling, and then I saw something about Israel, and I paused, and there's an image of him being featured in I think the New York Times, but in a newspaper, coming out in support of the Israeli government.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, I just, what's going on, Barb?
Okay, so this is another thread. This is another thread of all these. It's not just pillars. We have this intertwinement of Judaism and Zionism. And that linkage is what we need to break apart, because they're not the same. Zionism is not Judaism. There was no Zionism before 1948.
Yeah, but someone with the intellect of an Al Sharpton, they would know these things.
They do know these things. But the key is when you look at Zionism and you look at who is supporting Zionism, you're looking at not just right-wing people trying to destroy whatever, but you're looking at Christian Zionism, and you're looking at different threads of Christian evangelicalism, Christian, and you know this, of ideas within some sections of the Christian church who believe Israel should be at war. So
yeah,
that
but
that's not
Barb,
his. That's not his, is what you're
yeah,
saying.
his tradition is more in line with, say, Cornel West, who is definitely an anti-Zionism person.
We don't know why people come out with their support of Israel. But
Well,
it's
I
not
can
only
tell you what Al
what
Sharpton
he's
is saying.
okay. What is he saying?
That it wants to honor, Jews were involved in the formation of the NAACP at the beginning of the 20th century. They were involved in civil rights demonstrations. Even, we know the story of, a young man getting killed and maimed. Um, so and just plenty of rabbis who marched with Dr. King, that kind of
Right.
thing. And so they want to honor that relationship. But the thing is that to me it seems like I think that they know that they can't afford to conflate Judaism with Zionism. I mean, Al Sharpton would know something like that. So there's got to be something else at play here, Barb.
Well, I think what's interesting to me about that, and I've seen it with the Anti-Defamation League here, who's very strong where we live, and they
Yes.
often conflated, and their assessment, they go back to the civil rights movement. They invoke Martin Luther King. That is
Yes.
always invoked.
Yeah.
And yet they go no further. They don't invoke Israel. They don't invoke anything past 1948. Because if you do, then you have to look at what that means. And all of this anti-Semitism seems to cut off at that point. For Jews, for everyone, they're afraid to look past that because then they'd have to face it. What Zionism has invoked and all the laws they've created to make being a Palestinian a second-class citizen, if not inhuman.
So what do you think about South Africa and, The Hague? What's going on there?
I think that's extremely interesting because, and for me, I'm not a legal expert. I'm not going to go into the legal points of what international law means and what genocide, the definition of it is. They're going to define that at a very granular level.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think that's quite interesting. And just the fact that they're doing that is very important. But I also think it doesn't matter whether they win.
Right. Yeah.
Because even if you lose a debate, it doesn't mean you're wrong.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that they've done this as South Africa, as a nation that has gone through this exact torturous genocide, they understand the meaning of it. And I understand it at a psychological, at a spiritual level, at a political level. There are so many levels that South Africa brings to this discussion. And that's why it's a beautiful thing they've done this.
I would balk at attesting to any state having moral authority. And so this idea of, people saying, they are standing in unconditional solidarity with Israel. I don't stand in unconditional solidarity with the U.S. or anybody. They're just, but if a country had moral authority for this, it would be a country that was not culpable for settler colonialism and genocide of its indigenous population, it would be a country that has a long history of engaging the issue and didn't just pop out of nowhere. And you can go back, a couple of generations, and you'll see where Mandela tied the future of South Africa to Palestinians, to the people of Palestine, Desmond Tutu, and so many others. And just 2 weeks ago, Mandla Mandela, the grandson of Nelson Mandela, helped to host a conference to talk about this. So, these are not outliers in South Africa. No. It's not like, two people are showing up at the World Court saying we represent the country. This is the zeitgeist of their country. They paid the price to be who they are and to have their moral, their moral authority, their voice. And so this is the last country you want to have accusing you of genocide, right?
Right. And as you're speaking about South Africa, and when we relate it to Palestine, and then I hear Zionists ask the question, but there's no one to negotiate with. They're all terrorists. They all want to kill us. We're very afraid. And then you look in the prison, and I don't remember his name, and I feel terrible, but Barghouti is his name. He's in prison. Mm. He's been in prison. He's been a political prisoner in the Israeli jails for a long time.
Yeah.
Just as Nelson Mandela was in prison for 28 years?
27 years, yeah.
27 years, and then became president.
Right.
And so Israel, if Zionists could actually say, there are actually people to negotiate with. There are intellectuals. There are great minds in the Palestinian community.
But
I have met them.
But what's going on here, Barb, I think, is this is where South Africa sees themselves in this wheelhouse, because the resistance to the apartheid government, the ANC, they were accused of being terrorists all the time. I mean, there was nobody to negotiate with. I mean, they've heard all of this before, so they can see through it. But I look at the loop, the information loop that we live in. We find people who don't know what's going on, who they're ambivalent. They can't make a moral choice in our country. And we know this is true in Israel as well. I mean, there's an echo chamber of news there. And it's kind of hard to just say the people are wrong when there are systems in place to keep them in the dark. Yeah.
One of the things that we at Jewish Voice for Peace and what our leadership has shown us is it's a little aphorism that says, be hard on structures, be soft on people.
Yes.
Yes. And it's like, oh, it's just a saying. But if you really sit with that, we're talking about structures.
I love it.
That are hateful, and that they use that hegemony, that power. But the people who have been indoctrinated with this, which are all of us. I was brought up as a young Zionist. So I understand the indoctrination very profoundly.
Yes.
And I understand it from my fellow Jews and Zionists who are still caught in that terrible, terrible indoctrination. And they can't see it. They haven't been able to look because it would mean changing their whole view of life. And to do that is a very difficult spiritual struggle. As you know, that's why this program exists. To challenge your very basic premise of who you are and what you believe in and what is the meaning of life. And if you've been told this one thing and you challenge your own idea, then what are you going to do? What do you have you have nothing to stand on anymore.
So, I mean, I think we're pretty clear that even if we we're not able to anatomize everything, we're pretty clear on this one thing, that fear is what's driving this whole situation. And maybe we could say that one of the causes of, let's see, what the fear, it's xenophobia. xenophobia is so infectious right now. I mean, it always is, it seems. We need healing from this, but this is something that perhaps Israelis are feeling. I mean, it's xenophobia, and it's not unlike, you know, the Republican caucuses and primaries that are going on right now.
Mhm.
People are voting in places that are nowhere near the border, the U.S.-Mexico border, but they're making their decisions based on the fact that based on the assertion or their understanding that they're being invaded. I mean, they're in Iowa and New Hampshire, for goodness sake, but they're getting the feeling. But we saw this in the 2016 and the 2020 election. They're coming. Caravans are coming. And then as soon as the election takes place, well, especially after Trump got elected, it's like, well, no, the caravans turned around and went back. It's this fear thing that we've got to somehow crack.
It was interesting because I had this sweatshirt on. It says, "Fight the right." And it has an image, and I didn't know what the image was. I couldn't even understand it. But then it was like, oh, that's from the Unite the Right in Charlottesville, where they said, we will not be, what is the word?
Jews will not replace us.
We will not be replaced.
Yeah.
We will be, and they were overt neo-Nazis. They were overt white supremacists. They were overt. They were like complete happy.
So
to
it
show
looks
you
like
how
there's
were.
an image on your shirt of someone holding is that a tiki torch or?
Yeah, I can't remember. I was trying to find the image this morning. It looks kind of like theater, but I know it had to do with skinheads.
Yes, well, they did. They carried tiki torches and
I guess
Unite
that's
the
what
Right.
it is. It's tiki torches and some kind of image from there. And I need to go back. I want to see exactly what it is. But whatever it is, it's from that place.
Yeah.
And so when they say, and then you remember Trump said, well, there's nice people on both sides. Yeah. So to invoke neo-Nazis as nice people is quite extraordinary. And that is the narrative that they pose in Iowa that relates to the border. It relates to everything that has to do with fear and immigration and all of the ways we cannot face our responsibility to people who are different than ourselves, who are not white.
Yeah. It makes me think of people. We recently honored Dr. King's birthday, and people talk about how he was trying to create unity and pull everybody together, when the fact is, he wasn't trying to pull everybody together. He wanted to he said that, we want people, all kinds of people, including Jews and Gentiles and so on, to be willing to struggle, to be willing to go to jail. That's a distinct part of the population. This is not everybody. This is not kumbaya. This is, these are people who are willing to put in the time and the energy to fight for justice. And I think that's what your shirt represents.
And I love what you're saying, because that's the process that's happened. I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's like how they turned someone like Martin Luther King into some kind of kumbaya figure when he was hated.
Oh, yeah. The most hated man in America, I think, in 1966.
My mother said when he died, I remember I was 10 years old, and my mother said, good riddance. My mother said that.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to even face that memory. It came to me and I was like, how horrifying to think of my mother saying that thing. She was a social worker. So
but you're going to be soft on people. You got to be soft on people because the systems are brutal. And, I think about it was in April of 1967 that King spoke at Riverside Church beyond Vietnam, his anti-war speech, April of 67. And then to the day he was killed a year later. Something else that happened in 67 was Muhammad Ali refused to be inducted into the U.S. Armed Forces.
Yes.
And listen, what we see in both of King lost his life and Ali lost a fortune and his title. When you stand up to the military-industrial complex, people are going to maybe think, if they haven't looked into this, they might think this sounds a little bit conspiracy theorist-like. But JFK, President John F. Kennedy, was about to announce that he was going to withdraw troops from Vietnam. And what happens? He's out of there. Even a president has to go along. So it shows you, we've seen presidents be powerless. And then we've also seen them be shameless. But we've seen presidents be powerless when it comes to the military-industrial complex. This is what we're dealing with right now. The tail is wagging the dog.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the military-industrial complex that's what's so interesting about Gaza and Israel. It brings together all of these things, because if you think of the armament industry, all the bullets, all the tanks, in Ukraine too, that industry is making billions and billions and billions of dollars. And you better believe President Biden is not going to cut them off.
There you go. There you have it.
This is why, that's where the money for the campaigns come from.
Yeah.
That's where the money for grieved goes to.
Barb, what are we dealing with locally? Our local congressional representative.
Exactly, Carbajal. And so you pull together that political pillar.
Yeah.
The financial pillar is the military-industrial complex. And the cultural is this Jewish Zionism that needs to be split. And we need to educate ourselves how to do that with kindness, or not kindness so much as compassion. Because if we are soft on people, that means we have to figure out a way to communicate our feelings and our information and our history all together without harming one another.
Yes. There's a woman you may have met or heard of, Helena Pascarella.
Yes.
She's running. She wants to unseat Salud Carbajal, who I love as a human being, but basically he's co-signing. When I wrote him, a month ago after Congress voted 311 to 14 to essentially equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And I wrote him to say, I will not be gaslighted by you or Congress. And there are a lot of us out here who refuse to be gaslighted. We see what we see and we know what we know. And so Helena she has vowed to take none of the, defense industry money, which is abundant here in, Santa Barbara County, but she is committed to not taking that money.
And I think that is the reason Carbajal is, I forget the word at the moment. He doesn't care, because all of his money comes from that industry, from Raytheon, all Northrop Grumman, all the people that are employed. And so what's interesting is we've sent these letters to him asking him for ceasefire now. We've been doing that since the beginning. Yes. And he does this horrible, horrible thing. He refused initially. Yeah. And then we made demands and we show up and we continue to write him as you have done. And what does he do? He sends out a big, long thing. I am for humanitarian aid because I think there should be a pause. Yeah. Yeah. As if a pause of a couple hours at a time could ever save millions of Palestinians who are starving, who have no water, who have no food, who have no medical care, whose homes have been destroyed. and have nowhere to go. I mean,
Well,
how can you? This is
here's
my mind shuts down when I say those things.
yeah, because and this is the hugeness of it all, because it's not just Salud Carbajal, but if 311 people in Congress vote this way or either vote present, this means that a lot of people that you would think or who would call themselves progressives are voting, to say the same thing as Carbajal. I don't know if he considers himself a progressive. He's a Democrat, but I don't think he sees himself that
No.
way. But the thing is that, of those 311, how many of them are BIPOC? How many of them are LGBTQ plus? How many of them, in any other scenario, they stand up for the people. But in this case, they're not. This is what I'm just really burdened by.
And this is the money. This is the money of that industry that they're making so much money, and not only the corporations, but this comes from the financial realm, the political realm, and the cultural realm, because this has to do with that conflation of Zionism and Judaism, and of that definition of anti-Semitism. And so that there's so much laid on top in so many layers that we can't really even digest it. We can't integrate it. And then you put genocide on top of it, and you just cannot figure out how to deal with it, which is why I'm so appreciative of Jewish Voice for Peace, because they're offering us this way of taking parts of it, thinking about a piece of it at a time, and understanding that piece. And there's so many pieces within those pillars. Each one of the financial one includes the political, where you have that money from the military industrial complex supporting the campaigns. Yeah. And then you have organizations like AIPAC and the ADL and the Jewish Federation and the mainstream Jewish community saying it's anti-Semitism. So they go along with this military industrial complex. So, and then you've got all the people so the complexity of all those things intertwined make it seem impossible. But that's what we know, is that things seem impossible until they're not.
Thank you.
That's what happened in South Africa.
Yes.
Right?
What a shock. But, I was talking with a friend, a couple actually, who lead a church in a township in South Africa. And I remember they were visiting here and in my living room. And this was, closer to that period in the wake of the end of apartheid. And I remember telling him, his name is Mluleki. And I said, Mluleki, it just had happened so suddenly. And I remember the look on his face when he said, "Suddenly for you, my brother."
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly that. It's so beautiful coming out of this conference, because our leadership has been struggling, and we've all been struggling, but our leadership is in daily, hourly contact with the global Palestinian community. And that is an extraordinary thing.
Okay, let me ask this. Is there a religious motivation among your gathering? Let me frame. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, because that's also been new to me and helpful to me.
Sure. Well,
because what we're by taking apart the threads of Zionism and Judaism, what we do and what I saw and what I experienced was this, and I'm getting chills as I think about what I experienced there. We have cultural leaders, we have religious leaders who are bringing this renewed cultural ritual that show us that the Jewish culture is alive, and it's not some old thing.
Okay, so
from the words of the Bible. This is like we're living it.
Okay.
We're living it, and it's beautiful.
It is
we
beautiful.
we were singing, I could play it for you. I recorded it. We were singing, not Ella Baker, is it Ella, who sang, we will not be, it's one of the traditional songs.
We shall not be moved, or
We shall not be moved and we cannot rest. We cannot rest.
Yes.
And we cannot rest.
Might have been Mavis Staples, but it could have been Ella Baker. I mean, it was a very common song.
Yeah, it's a common song. All 300 of us were singing it together in harmony. And it was, you're crying, you're grateful, you're happy together. And it's just like joy, pure joy. And that cultural, that's what we are renewing. And that's what we are showing, that you don't have to be a Zionist to be a Jew.
Okay, so here's the thing. I was at a rally at the Santa Barbara courthouse last Thursday.
I saw that. Thank you for being there, by the way.
Yeah, well, I towards the end of my talk, I quoted a portion of John Lennon's. I do this a lot. Imagine, and there's that clause that stands that says, "Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too." And whenever I read that, I kind of get it, but I don't fully co-sign to it, because it's like saying, it's almost like saying anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism. It's almost conceding that point, because, just like here in the U.S., we see this resurgent Christian nationalism. Well, that's not the intent of the founder. It's not Christianity. In the same way that Zionism is not Judaism. There is this mystical aspect to all of our traditions. There's a mystical aspect, and it's not ours to completely reject it out of hand and fight against it, when that's not the problem. The problem is when it turns into a statist kind of thing. And so we've got to find ways. We've got to find ways for the people who are people of faith and spirituality, of different traditions, of Jewish traditions and Christian and Muslim. All of us need to bring the real thing together.
And that's what was happening in our grieving circle together.
Oh, and that's Sunday.
And then your day of lament is exactly that. It is about us bringing our spirits forward and knowing at our core, all the way through us, in every aspect of our life, that is what's true. The love and the grieving and wanting to stop that hate in others and ourselves, and to see others as ourselves. All those things are crucial to our spiritual health, our mental health in every way. And when we get that, that group was an anti-war group.
And you know what? To me, it's an anti-colonial, anti-imperial, and anti-white supremacy.
Exactly.
Because when the way that the state of Israel is able to convince people of a particular company line is not dissimilar to the way that our country has been spellbound from the beginning. That the only way to prosperity and success and peace is through white supremacy, is through domination, and to convince people of this is the same thing. It's happening in both. It's happening in a lot of places, but right now on center stage, you have the U.S. but U.S. is obligated to stand with Israel in a sense of hiding from conscience. It's like we've got to CYA for ourselves, for each other, and this is what makes South Africa such a bother, because they don't carry that burden of white supremacy and colonialism.
Right.
They're seeing things that these other two countries, at least the people, are not seeing.
And I think this nationalism however it appears and wherever it appears, because ethno-states, I mean, that's another way of talking about Israel and United. These are ethno-states. We had this Christian, not good Christian, but Christian nationalism as one of our...
And essentially, it's a white Christian nationalism.
It's a white Christian nationalism.
And let me just say, as you've probably heard before, anybody can be white.
Yeah, I mean that is the point.
As long as you parrot the right lines and hold the same convictions, quote unquote convictions, then you can be white. Yeah.
And so, since that has the power, so many people want power, any kind of agency in their life. So they go, okay, I'm Black or I'm Jewish, but I'm white. That's the only way. And if you see me as white, I'm going to have more power. And I've understood that. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I've understood myself to be passing. And that's like an interesting, we've thought of colorism and how people pass or don't pass and choose or don't choose. But I've always understood myself to not be a Christian in when I'm with other people. And I've always go, okay, Barb, there are certain things you cannot say right now. They will know who you are if you say those things. And just the fact that I would think that means I am passing. But now, when you declare yourself as someone like, I'm Jewish, but I am in resistance with you for many reasons, it changes things. It changes who I'm no longer passing.
Yeah, you know what? Whiteness is not a phenotype.
No, race is. This whole thing is is make-believe.
So since whiteness is not a phenotype, what that tells me is that not only can anybody be white, but all people who claim to be white are actually passing.
Right. That's exactly
all
true.
White people are passing because it's not a real thing. It's,
I mean, the Irish, the Italians, et cetera, they're not white. And when you say you're white, it means you've had to suppress those parts of yourselves.
Yes.
Your own historical language, your historical lineage, our lineage of our ancestors. So the Yiddish of my Ashkenazi background, has been, my parents spoke it and their parents spoke it, and I have remnants of it in me. And we all use, that's kind of common language, bagels and cream cheese and lots of bagel. And it's like, and oy vey, people will say those things. They don't even think about it. And then we use Black, things from Black culture in our music in every way. And we don't acknowledge it. And now that we are acknowledging these appropriations and resisting it and talking about it, it's a really very rich time. And that's why the resistance is so feared. It's so feared. And we're winning in a lot of ways. That's why it's so extreme on the other side. And as Stephanie Fox, who is executive director of Jewish Voice for Peace and a very loving, heartfelt person, she says, these pillars look like they could never fall.
Yeah.
But these cracks inside, they're getting bigger. And you're not going to realize it until they collapse.
I don't mind appropriation if it's being used for the right reasons. I think of, and I know not everybody's on the same page with this, but I think of, around the world, hip hop is quote unquote being appropriated, but it's pretty much generally used for resistance, for speaking truth to power. So, I'm not mad at them. And not only that, but, even in pop, K-pop is huge. And that group BDS, right? They're everywhere. But they are appropriating Black culture, in an Asian context. But I am so delighted that they're standing up to Zionism and racism and, and fascism. I love that they're doing it. So I'm fully supportive of all of that kind of stuff.
And I think those are discussions that are ongoing.
Yes.
People and what it means to be to appropriate. I mean, I'm an artist. Art. It's just like the history of appropriation, basically,
Yes.
of cultures from all over the world and the best parts of them. And we see them and we go, oh, that's so beautiful. And why not? And just like this Jewish thing we're talking about, this culture has beauty in it. Why not create it? It's ongoing. Culture is a living thing. It's not like, that's it. That's Black culture and you can't do anything else but appropriate it. No, it's alive.
Yes.
It's not back there. It's gone on to do these other things. And so as we all appropriate each other, and I think as we gain strength in ourselves and become more in solidarity and join our resistance together, we see our power and it's beautiful. It's not a power to harm. It's a power to destroy these structures and be soft and gentle and loving with people.
And this is again why the title of our podcast, because being soft on people is what it's all about. God is not an asshole, and I know that not everybody, and I think it's a beautiful thing that not everybody interprets the idea of God or gods in the same way, or goddesses, or and I know that you as a Tibetan Buddhist, you know that the word Buddha simply means to be fully awake, and so that's your concept of God. It's all of us becoming awake and being beings of compassion and connecting with all people who are that way. I mean, who can criticize anything like that, right?
Well, that's why they're afraid if we wake up and really understand that in our bodies and minds, it will collapse. All of they have no foundation to stand on.
Well, everybody, we've been sitting here. Barb Parmet has been my guest today. Carrie had a bit of an emergency and couldn't be here with us, but we will talk to Carrie again in a week. But I'm so grateful to have Barb, who calls herself, I think, among other things, a post-Zionist Jew, and kind of gives some credence to what those of us who are not Jewish, to the way that we're to our perceptions and our feelings. And it kind of gives us, more permission, I guess you might say, to validate the reality of what we know ourselves to be experiencing when we see, these thousands of folks dying and the immorality of it all.
And I just want to thank you so much, David, for all the work you've done over the years and the lineages you bring forward and offer us. And it gave me strength to come forward. So I'm so grateful to you and to our growing community of solidarity. I really, that is so beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you, Barb. And we'll have you back again. Well, we'll have you back in a few months when Palestinians are free. Or maybe a few weeks.
Free Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. We are people who have left behind performance-based religion and the shame that comes with it. Maybe you have a personal liberation story to tell, and we want to know about it. Please contact us on Twitter at God is not an asshole, or text 805-703-8393, because the world needs to know that God is not an asshole.